Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for watching. Um, let's start with the three prostrations. So again, have that intention of giving thanks to the teachings that you'll be receiving, offering your body, speech, and mind. These full prostrations is also meant to put aside your ego, your pride, what you know, and be open so that you can learn. And then to set the intention, let's do the prayers. Remember the mandala. Have your hands together. Have your ring finger form like the Great Mountain. And then crisscross your pinkies. Have your thumbs grab each one. And then crisscross your middle finger and have your forefinger grab opposite um, middle fingers. Right? So you have this Great Mountain, 4 continents. So see if you can do that. If you find it very tricky, just have your hands in a bowl, and I will hold up the prayers for you. We'll do it in Tibetan, being class 9. You can see that? All right. Goes Sashi, Puki, Jokshing, Meitok, Tram, Biram, Lingshi, Yende, Genpa, Di, Sangye, Shindu, Mite, Uwargi, Trokun, Namdak, Shingla, Dupar, Shok. Idam Guru Ratnam Madlakam Niratayami. Just want to see something that's clear. Okay. And then that is offering the mandala. And the next one again is taking the refuge. And so again, this one you do 3 times. And it goes Sangye, Chudang, Soki, Choknam, La, Jiangshu, Pardu, Dakni, Kyapsu, Chi, Dakni, Jinyin, Gipe, Sunam, Ki, Drola, Panchir, Sangye, Jupar, Shok, Sangye, Chudang, Soki, Choknam, La, Jiangshu, Pardu, Dakni, Kyapsu, Chi, Dakni, Jinyin, Gipe, Sunam, Ki, Drola, Panchir, Sangye, Jupar, Shok, Sangye, Chudang, Soki, Choknam, La, Jiangshu, Pardu, Dakni, Kyapsu, Chi, Dakni, Jinyin, Gipe, Sunam, Ki, Drola, Panchir, Sangye, Jupar, Shok. We always do that last syllable with that growl. But I am very excited to share this class. I have to say I was had a little resistance against it. This one actually has the most um, info out of all the classes so far that I've taught. And so, yeah, it took me a little bit of time to go over it. And having to do it a second time, my intention is to try to make a lot of this understandable. So definitely if you have questions that come up, feel free to email me after you hear this or write down notes now as you listen to this. But in some ways, I think if you're in this class and you're listening, you definitely have an understanding and a belief of the emptiness of things that you do hopefully believe in some ways that our reality, what we see, hear, smell, touch, taste, um, feel, think, is not out there, but it is something coming from our mind, um, projection coming onto a blank screen from our past karma. Because that is where, you know, the belief in that gives you the understanding that you can change your karma, can change um, things. That if things really were self-existent, the word they use in Tibetan, gokcha, that we refer to, that if things really existed the way they are, let me show you this pen. Tell me that. Um, that if things really existed the way they are, then everyone would see it that way. Just use a cup. Everyone would see this as a cup. And that no matter what, people would see this as a cup for all time. You know, 100 years from now, if this still existed, people would say cup if it was self-existent. Self-existent things, they said, doesn't exist because it doesn't change. Um, and as you may probably have noticed, hopefully in yourself, you've changed over time. Right? Your thoughts have changed over time. Your feelings have changed. Can change like that, So things can only exist if they do change. So I'm gonna start with, just because there's just so much, I thought I want to make sure we get the main point. Today's class it's a continuation of last week's class. It's talking about wisdom and emptiness again. And it's proving emptiness logically. And the main message, almost kind of like, you read a book and you go, hey, what's the end of the story? The end of this, the big message is that if everything in the universe, including you, your thoughts, your feelings, time, has parts, is made up of parts, it's not just one whole thing, then nothing exists self-existently. If there's parts in it, then it doesn't really exist. And if it doesn't really exist, then you can say it's empty. Excuse me. So maybe one more little tidbit I thought I'd share. Some of you know the Dalai Lama. One of the things that many people admire in him, amongst many things, is that he's been really open to learning. Um, I know it's just a movie, The 7 Years in Tibet with Brad Pitt, but it shows him really excited to, see movie projector, watch movies, learn about the Western world. And from what I've heard, he's continued to have that in his later years, that he loves meeting scientists um, to find out what they were discovering about our reality. So I was kind of preparing this morning and I kind of found some good stuff that I about what science has found about the way our mind works. I'll share one little tidbit. It's actually on the handout, but when I was trying to look for an example of how we see things, one of the examples they say is that light travels into our eyes, goes through nerves, and goes to our brain. Um, and from there, supposedly you know, it interprets the light, the edges, um, everything to allow us to see what we see, allow you to see me, and how you perceive me right now. But what is really interesting is that now scientists have studied that the pathway for information isn't just one way, like we think. Like you look at the cup or you look at me, you think it's kind of coming from there into your brain, and then you see it in your brain. But actually, what they do see, what they do see is that the image in your brain is actually created partly from your brain. And that the same image can be seen two ways. So maybe I'll give you that little treat that I discovered. If you go to your handout and scroll to the second page. In the second page, you should see, um, you know, how does our brain interpret visual stimuli? And uh, there's a lot that's highlighted. Google did that itself, but I tried to highlight this last mm, part of the paragraph. And it's a little darker blue, and you'll see it say, integrating past experiences to make sense of the world. So using our past, this is what Buddhism is saying, right? So this next sentence was actually also on it, but I couldn't screenshot it. But read it out. This process is highly interactive, involving both bottom-up, sensory input-driven, and top-down, memory expectation-driven processing, allowing for rapid and sufficient interpretation of visual scenes. That our brain interprets visual stimuli by the things coming in. That's what they mean. It's sensory input driven, bottom up, but also top down. It's from our memory, from what we um, expect, expectation driven, allowing for rapid and efficient interpretation of visual scenes. Because think about it, yeah, uh, how do we make out images so quickly? So below that, you'll see some pictures. Start with the one on the left. What do you see? I'm pretty sure some of you have seen these images before, but take a look at it. Hopefully, you haven't seen it recently. But they say some will actually see the black in that image, goes up into your brain. And for some of you, you'll see right away candlestick. You know, top is where the candle is, narrows down, and then there's wide base. But if some of you have seen this before, or you keep looking at it right now, you may also see it possibly being an image of two faces in white facing each other. And the part where the candlestick supposedly narrows in is where their noses are. Below that is their lips. Above that, their eyes, the forehead. So this image could be interpreted that same way. Now, more recent science for this is on the third page, and I kind of copied the link to where I saw this study. Um, that these images are from it wasn't really naturalist. Oh, yes, the Gestalt theory. I don't know how long ago that was created, but it definitely was before this more recent study. And this study on page 3 about how human brain cells cause a change of view was basically describing these type of images and saying that our eyes might pick up the black immediately, but as we look at it longer, and you can look at those other images now on the right of the second page, that you might then interpret it. Your mind will start interpreting the same image, exactly the same, differently. Seeing the white, seeing on the image on the right of the one that we just talked about, again, two faces. Um, you go to the further right, maybe you might see a female body in black, but then if you look at the white, you kind of see two faces with the back of their heads against each other. A nice, interesting one is the one below that. And again, it could look like two faces facing each other. Or what I see is like an apple core, or an apple, yeah, bitten on the sides, and that leaf on the top. Um, so yeah, you can scroll down and see some other examples, but this study is showing that um, the same thing as what I just said. We receive images, but also our brain uh, sends out an image to another part of our brain that's processing. It's not like it sends it out to the eye. Our eye really just is a receptor for light, but the part of our brain that um, processes the information receives data from our eyes, but also from another part of our brain, which sounds to me a little bit like how our karma, the film in our head, projects onto this blank screen through our mind for us to see what we see. Mm. So that's the really amazing thing that I was kind of looking at this morning. So I kind of shared that. Um, Let me just stay on track. That obviously we're going to start with a little review. And so, um, when we talk about the third principal path, first one again, renunciation, second one, bodhicitta, and the third one, wisdom, which includes this intellectual understanding of emptiness. It is saying, you know, until we get the direct perception of emptiness, until you really understand it, we can try to understand it in our minds, you know, logically. And so this is one of the things I shared last week, and I won't take credit for the saying. It's a great one from my teacher that Buddha wasn't a Buddhist, Jesus was not a Christian, and I will add Mohammed was not a Muslim. Um, that they shared truths in their time, but um, you know what we might consider those as religions now were created by people afterwards, right? Um, yeah, that's Buddhism. It's isn't, I will say, yeah, some people call it a religion, and that's fine. But really, I will, I would say it's definitely a way to explain what we're experiencing, and a way to, for some who want to um, reach enlightenment and to not have suffering, a path that way. So, what was great when my wife showed me this TikTok about Buddhism was this gentleman, was had gone to a monastery for a while and he came out, and so he's, you know, sharing what he feels about Buddhism. And it was a great line where he's like, you don't, Buddhism is, in his words, was explaining how our mind works, which I definitely agree with. And that you can be you can be a Christian and still get benefits from learning about Buddhism. You can be a Muslim and get benefits of learning about Buddhism. You can be an atheist, not believe in God, believe and get benefits from learning about Buddhism because it explains to you how your mind works, how we see reality. So, yes, this is definitely what I wanted to start by sharing or reminding you of because I would say that I heard over and over that we shouldn't accept things that we hear out of blind faith, that we really are supposed, with anything we hear about Buddhism to test it out, you know, um, that things will affect us more if it is logical to us, because we are intellectual beings. And so this is what, this what we started with last week, talking about uh, proofs. It's a way of Buddhism explaining emptiness. And so, what I was suggesting you try and Google up monks debating was to see how their debating isn't arguing, but it's a way of, I guess it's like teaching to try to understand it, but they're questioning each other. So if you go back to the first page of the handout, you will see what we had tried to explain last week. That if you're trying to tell, you know, explain something to someone, you need to, you know, find common ground. That is what I've heard a lot. And I guess one of the problems you could say with religion is that people have beliefs. Example, there's only one God, there's only one way. If you're not following this way, then you're going to go to hell. um, that can cause a lot of problems. Because if you believe that, and you believe there is only one God, there is only one way, then maybe that may explain why colonialism occurred, why people went to other countries with that intent of converting people because they felt theirs was the way. And you could say from a good point of view, or from their heart, their intention was good, but um, unfortunately, that way can be interpreted that if you don't believe, then you are savages, and then we will take over and yeah, not be compassionate, and sometimes not be peaceful, not do it through peaceful means. So yeah, um, it's important in finding common ground. Um, so this is where, here's the example. They say that if you, three parts of a logical statement must have a subject, characteristics to be proven, and a reason. So I highlighted that on the first page of the handout, right? And the example is consider the sun. The sun is not blue because it is yellow. So that's an example of each of those three. Um, there's another example that you can see below. Consider sound. It is changing because it is made. And so this is another example, a simple one, putting in all 3 points. So now what is required is, if you were to debate with someone, if you were to try to prove this to someone, that they needed also to understand what the sun is, that they needed to understand the color blue is, um, you know, needed to understand color yellow. What else did it say? Um, that he had seen the sun before, because if he had none of this is true, he might believe the sun was blue, right? So there has to be, those commonalities before you can actually prove something to someone else. And this is where so far I've liked about Buddhism. They say, we're not here to convert people. If people do not, if you cannot find common ground, and just say you were talking to someone who believes, well, um, Buddhism is evil because they don't believe in a God, you probably are not going to go very far. Um, explaining more about that. And then you shouldn't, they say, because actually pushing them or, trying to ram your thought, your belief to them can actually make them resist it even more, which is not good karma for them and not good karma for yourself. So, yeah, um, when you share what you learn, be open to hearing where the people are at. Um, you say, yeah, don't to uh, try to go out and seek followers. That's not uh, what Buddhism asks, right? So anyway, so another example was what um, is what we kind of went over quickly at the end of last class. It's the three basic knowledges, basic path and knowledge of all things, which refers to the knowledges of the different beings, people in the lower school, people who have seen direct perception of emptiness, and knowledge of all beings of Buddhas. So they're saying consider those things, they do not really exist, or they do not exist as one thing which really exists, nor do they exist as many. So just to explain why italicized and bolded really actually means self-existent. So that they're saying they do not exist self-existently. These knowledges do not, kind of like we might think a cup, exist out there. Uh, for they do not exist as one thing um, or as many things. So again, with really there, the example they're saying is that if you can prove that one of the basic knowledges doesn't really exist, uh, then you can also say a lot of them don't. So the examples they were saying, just say you're trying to prove Martians to someone, you know, um, many would be 100 Martians. Now, all you needed to do is prove to the person there isn't one Martian. If there isn't one Martian, there can't be 100 Martians, right? So this is what this proof is trying to establish, right? So um, that is what we're trying to prove. Like in the previous class, it was saying there's five classic proofs of emptiness. Now, the one I showed you about the pen is one of them that just different beings, not all of them, babies, animals, people who've been living in the wild, never seen a pen, will not see a pen. Let's say use a cup um, as that because they don't have in their brain that information to place onto that. So this proof, the first proof of emptiness, is saying that if you can prove that something doesn't exist as one thing, then you can prove it doesn't exist at all. Mm, because things can either exist or not exist, right? Those are just the two options. Um, exist self-existently. That's what they're saying. Okay. So just to maybe backtrack, there's actually a whole course on logic. Um, put down the three. Okay. I'll add it to the handout, even though it's not there right now. So when you get three statements that you are trying to explain, you need to explain how three relationships, how the statements are connected. So the first one, relationships that have to be valid for uh, this relation has to exist for this proof to be valid, is that if there's three, then there is one. So look at the first example. Three is because it is yellow. So they said the sun must be yellow um, because it is yellow. And the first statement is the sun. So they're saying three must be connected to one, that the sun must be yellow for this to be true. The second relationship is that number three and number two must be true. The relationship between the reason and the characteristic to be proven must be sound. So here it is. If the sun is yellow, then the sun is not blue. And that is true, right? It can't be both blue and yellow. Right? Um, and the third relationship that needs to be proven is that if number two is not true, then the actual word is if you negate two, three is also negated. So the second one, the sun is not blue. So the opposite of that is the sun is not blue, or basically the same. The sun is blue, right? So if that opposite is true, the sun is blue, then the opposite of number three, because it is not yellow. So that would be true. If the sun was blue, it would not be yellow. So this is how you prove those three. And you could do the same with that example of sound. But what we're going to do is consider this third one. And so this third one is starting by saying It's actually starting with the second relationship. If three, then two. It's saying that if one thing does not exist, then nothing really exists. Right? So this is where I'm going to use the cup. Right? When you look at this, I know you see a cup, but what you don't realize, and what I copied onto the handout, was how our brain also works when we see something specific. And it says there too, we're picking up the edges. Like you don't see the whole picture of the cup. What your eyes do first is capture the sides, the edges, the top and the bottom, the sides of the cup, and then relays that into your head, right? So I wanted to show you that on the first page, that handout. Some of you who took the first course might actually remember me drawing this on the whiteboard. And if you look at it, if you were in the class, you might now remember what it is. But if you don't, that's perfectly fine. Because in your brain, you might not have had the image of what is that? What is that? But if you scroll down to page 4, the last page, you can see the same object drawn on the side, which now will go, okay, I see. That was a teacup drawn from the top, right? Kind of like that. And so basically, you were just, you know, your mind now recognizes that image and labels it. So it's the same with this cup. You know, maybe if I turned it like this and you didn't see the handle, and I just showed you this, you might not be completely certain it was a cup. It could be a little pot. It could just be a little bowl. I mean, why? Because you can't see the back of it. But if you did now see the side, the back of it, it's easier to identify what it is. So this is actually what happens for everything we see. We're kind of picking out um, parts of it that we actually, according to Buddhism, never see the whole thing. We actually only see parts, top and bottom, side to side. Um, you can say it if you saw it that way, you'd do the same, see the edges, and then your mind throws on, okay, it's a cup. Um, and what I copied was showing you how our brain works. And that is on page. Yeah, above that teacup on the fourth page. Um, can the brain multitask? And some of us do believe we can do multiple things, multiple screens on our computer, do things while we're on the phone. But what I'm hoping some of you now hear is, I think it's quite common to hear that your brain really doesn't work that way. It actually really works by just focusing, shifting your focus from one to another. So if you were to hold your phone upright, well, maybe you're watching on the phone, but if you're looking at something else right now, And listening to me, really your brain is going from listening to looking, listening to looking, listening to looking. There it talks about how multitasking is a myth. Um, there's a lot more about how energy costly it is for our minds to flip back and forth, which is why, one of the drawbacks of being on the phone um, and doing something else is that it takes a lot of energy from your brain. It tires you out. So, um, yeah, the same way the brain works is the same way it picks up images. And so, this is where Buddhism is saying if you can prove things have parts, then you can prove that they don't exist self-existently. They don't exist as one thing. This is a cup. You say everybody knows it's a cup. A lot of people do. But um, if we can prove our cup has parts, then we can say it is not self-existent, right? Um, and so, for this example, parts of a cup would be, yeah, the top of the cup, the bottom of the cup, side of the cup, the handle of the cup, that there's parts. Because there are parts, um, we can say it doesn't exist self-existently. I'm going to grab, sure, I'm going to grab the pen. But I wanted the other examples I thought of was, have you ever at nighttime walked out and seen something you couldn't quite make out? A dark shadow, could be a raccoon, coyote, or then maybe on closer inspection, it was just a dog or a cat. One of the common Buddhist examples is saying, have you ever seen, I guess there's a lot in India, snakes that you think you saw a snake, but actually it was just a hose or a shadow that looked really scary. I actually still smile and laugh because, yeah, Halloween was not that long ago. And one year we went down to Maine and 14th area where our friends said, oh, a lot of the houses really go all out to a Halloween. They really decorate their house, make haunted houses, and it's a really fun neighborhood to, go trick or treating. So the kids were small, and so we said, yeah, we'll go. It's probably good amounts of candy. The boys were excited, and we go down there and pass by a few houses, and then we come to another one. Really, like they had coffins, and they had obviously the tombstones, and I'm about to walk up on the stairs to, accompany the kids to the door. I see a coffin on the side, and it looks like there's somebody, you know, I thought just like a doll dressed up in the coffin. All of a sudden, the supposedly doll gets up, and I forgot whether he said something or he moved or he touched me or something. I just freaked out. I just screamed like really loud, probably like a girl, I think. Anyway, it caused everyone to stare and laugh too because basically I got spooked. It was like a person dressed up and had come out of the coffin and to catch me who thought it was just a doll. Yeah. So yeah, definitely I was going to show you this. lets you know that Yuki's doing well. And if you look at that, you kind of might go, oh, is that Yuki lying down? On closer inspection, you should see that it's just a sweater that I have been tricked this same way when my wife's sweater was laid down like that. And I went to pet it, maybe even kiss its head, and to realize it was just a sweater. So, yes, our mind picks up certain parts, and in its effort to give us the info really fast, the same way, like a computer, fast computer, you type something, it brings it up. Um, it superimposes what it thinks it is without it necessarily being true. So the proof Buddhism is saying is that if you can prove things have parts, um, then you can prove that it doesn't exist. Because here's that if this cup, you know, completely on its own um, existed, by covering maybe just even half of it, it should just disappear, right? Because it requires the whole thing to be self-existent. The example they use is like your hand, or your fingers are part of your hand. And if there were no parts to your hand, you could cover up two fingers and your hand should disappear. But the fact that your hand is made up of different fingers as parts means that even when you cover it up, it doesn't cover. Um, and even when you cover it up, you can still see that it is a hand. Let me just check that as what it's saying. Yeah, that it's just confirming that you can never see. Um, if you perceive the parts, you can't perceive the whole. And if you weren't perceiving the parts, you couldn't see the object existing at all. Yeah. So if you weren't looking at the parts of the hand, you couldn't see the whole object at all. So, um, so the second part of the proof is that it is that three, that if three, then one. That is what we're trying to do. And so on the fourth page of the handout, actually, oops, no, on the first page of the handout, on the bottom, you'll see how we can try to prove that for all things, like all things in the universe, me, you, physical, that if you're to divide all things in the universe, they say you divide it into changing and unchanging things. Right? Things that change, things that don't. Unchanging things are not so many. We're going to talk about that later. But for changing things, you can subdivide that into physical things or mental things. And then we'll talk about mental things later. But for physical things, you can divide that into gross physical things or subtle physical things. And in this way, they mean gross, um, uh, meaning that big enough that you can see. Um, So yeah, here I'll read exactly the example they're saying. If you cover part of a physical thing, another part is still there, right? You cover up some fingers, other fingers are still there. So there must be parts. Covering two fingers leaves three fingers, so fingers are parts. Otherwise, if there was no parts to your hand, then covering two fingers should make your whole hand disappear. All right. So subtle physical things would be things that you couldn't see with your eyes. And so they say, think about the smallest subtle thing. Consider an atom, right? That if there were, you know, if two atoms were completely blended into each other, that every part of an atom, think of the hydrogen atom, the smallest one is just one proton and one neutron. If two of those molecules were completely one, then you would assume all its edges of one would be in direct contact with another. It's almost, you'd have, the only way that could happen is if almost like one is superimposed onto another. So that two atoms actually would look like one atom. And if that was true, then everything in this universe would be just clumped up together. Right? In fact, it is not true that even atoms have parts. If you do have two atoms or even one atom, there is a top part to the atom. There's a bottom part, there's a left part, and a right part. Right? Um, and so, if that's true of atoms, then think of everything else, of which supposedly physical gross matter is made of. They are just made of atoms. More and more combinations and parts of atoms. So that's proving, if you can prove atom has a part, it's made up of parts, then everything in the physical world is made up of parts, which means that everything is not self-existent. You know? So now mental things, and this includes your mind and your mental functions, your feelings, anger, love. So this is where they say with mental things, think of something happening. Usually we think of things, like time, um, like mental things as occurring in a stream. That's probably the best example. Things don't all occur exactly at the same time, right? Uh, if you can think about your thoughts, your feelings, that there is a beginning and an end to the thought or to the feeling. So, yeah, I won't. I'll have you read if you are interested, and they kind of break it down into direct and remote causes, direct and remote causes. And I didn't read this beforehand, so there isn't much use in me kind of just reading it out for you now, but they separate it into those two parts. But for unchanging things, there are actually supposedly, according to Buddhism, not very many things which do not change. So one of them is, they say, cessation. And a cessation, if some of you remember, is something which ends. The example is once you have this understanding, that a realization that there's no Santa Claus, you have a cessation in your belief about Santa Claus. Supposedly in nirvana, there's a cessation of all mental afflictions. Anything that can disturb your mind, they're gone. Hard to imagine. I can say for myself, there's always things that seem to disturb the peace of your mind. But yeah, cessations are things which, once they occur, um, don't supposedly end. But even with cessation, there is we can see parts in cessation in that there is a time when there wasn't this cessation. And then there's also the actual beginning of when that cessation ends. So again, similar example to time, that there is a part. Cessation is not constant. But they consider it unchanging because in that its nature is constant. Right? So another example of unchanging thing that you'll hear of in other classes is empty space. And so they don't mean kind of the space between things, space between an atom, space between two fingers. They're not talking about that space. They're talking about the space in the absence of something, that this cup is taking up empty space, right? That when it moves, that empty space is there. So this concept again of space, even though it's unchanging, means that there is a top and a bottom, a left and a right to the space. So that's how they say even empty space has parts: north, south, east, west. And then the third unchanging thing they talk about is emptiness. That emptiness never changes. It can go in and out of existence. So that with, just say, this cup broke, the emptiness of the cup is gone, right? It's no longer there. It says, has no beginning or end. Each object has its own emptiness, and all emptinesses are parts of all objects. Emptinesses are parts of emptiness. All objects' emptinesses are parts of emptiness. So that is one I would say might be worth cooking. We're just kind of leaving for now. They say in Buddhism, there's things that you hear that don't make sense to you. You can, instead of just kind of throwing it out, they say either just cook on it, sit on it in meditation. I would say personally, I've never really cooked this thought. That's why it kind of seems a little new to me. Or you can just put it aside. I can tell you, yeah, one thought that I've cooked a little bit on and I can still say is difficult to um, intellectualize is the fact that supposedly our mental stream, our existence has no beginning and no end. We always do think of things as having a beginning and an end. Most of the things we consider, you look on this diagram, are things which are changing, which do have a beginning, do have an end. You know, these three things about unchanging things, I guess they were all new ideas to me. So, yeah, definitely emptiness is one of them that I haven't really thought about not changing, but I did think about, yeah, how something can have no beginning, no end. And I can just share that my um, understanding that now might just be thinking of a circle. A circle has no beginning and no end. So, but again, coming back to the main point at the end of this class with, if everything in the universe has parts, then nothing exists really. Just saying that nothing exists self-existently, or just saying that everything is empty, right? It's not coming from its own side. So, yeah, if you can now maybe do the meditation, say for homework, um, to think of the attractive object, um, which they say is one of the hardest things to see the emptiness of, things that you really like, um, whether it's a thing, a thought, a feeling, an idea, a person, that it really does seem like what you are attracted to comes from them, not from yourself, not from your past karma. And I say that because that is actually part of my Tantra homework, to think of um, what attracts me and to meditate on the emptiness of it, because it usually is really hard to, um, you don't feel it. You really feel that the wonderful feeling that you feel comes from that object, that person. Which you might say, what's so bad about that? But that can lead to some doing misdeed. Example, let's use the example money. A lot of people do like money. They do want it because it gives them, allows them to get the things they want. So if that craving, desire for money is so much, so high, can it lead to doing misdeeds? Can it lead to um, hurting other people's lives? Killing? Yeah, you could say it's led to wars. Can it lead to stealing? Certainly. I've been guilty of that. And my karma has ripened to have me lose 500,000. Can one's desire be so strong that it can lead you to sexual misconduct? Yeah. You see that in a lot of movies, books. Can it lead to lying? Certainly, and on and on. So, yeah, um, might it might those misdeeds not happen if we could see that they're not the source of it? Hopefully, that is what this understanding will lead us to. That we won't do misdeeds, and instead we'll plant seeds. Plant seeds. I had a friend who's going away on holiday, going off to Thailand, which he's married. I know his marriage is not so great right now. So I was kind of a little worried. He's going to Thailand, which is, you know, has been known to be a destination um, for sex. And so as I was talking to him about it, you know, he kind of told me about this expression in Chinese. He said, "Oh, you know, basically, it was saying if you what was he was kind of referring to something that happened to me recently, and he was kind of just saying, well, nothing happened, you didn't do anything, and in that way, you just ate poo, yeah, because you know you didn't do anything bad, you didn't um, that you know it's better to he said eat something good instead of eat poo. I guess that was the expression in Chinese. So before he left today, I just kind of sent him a text and I said, yeah, I mean, I know nobody likes to eat poo, but I said, if you don't do something, if, what did I write exactly? I said, I I'd rather eat poo instead of eating more poo later, and instead wait to eat something much better later. So yeah, I told him if he doesn't want to eat more poo later and he wants to eat something even better, to eat poo on his trip. Um, so um, hopefully you can apply that to anything that you are craving for, um, desiring. Um, that definitely this emptiness is supposed to remind us, you know, uh, that if you really want it, you know, for example, the person might want to buy lots of things that make them happy, to make them feel abundant. Maybe the way to actually feel rich is to give. That giving money or things will be planting the seeds for them to receive more of it later. So I will leave you with that thought that, yeah, emptiness itself is just an idea, but how we're supposed to apply it is to, um, again, use it to take responsibility for our lives. The teacher who taught me this class, I think, had this message that we create our own reality by what we think, say, and do. And so if you're not receiving the results of what you would like right now, that the best way um, is to plant those seeds of what you would like. And to definitely avoid planting the seeds of what you don't, what you might be already receiving right now, because you don't want to be getting more of that later on. So we will end class with our dedication. Thank you again so very much if you made it to this point in the class. Because I know the hardest part of this class is making the time to listen to this. And like last class, I will again encourage you to continue your practice. And that practice may be meditating, maybe doing the reading, reviewing the notes, just reflecting at the end of the day things that might have been good karma that have happened for you that you might want to dedicate part of to your enlightenment, plant seeds. And that if you are experiencing some not so good karma, I definitely do each day have that. That you know and remember that you're purifying it. That if you don't want it to continue, to do everything you can to not reply in kind. All right. So let's do the dedication. Are you dedicating part of this goodness of this towards your enlightenment? And we'll do that in Tibetan again. Kewa di kewo kun sunam yeshe zokzok shing sunam yeshe lejong wei tampa kunyi topar sho. Your three prostrations. See you next week for the last class of this series. Thank you so very much. Namaste.